A 13th century Zen master named Dogen said that our practice is most important when it's getting dark and we don't think it's going to get light again for quite a while. Well, here we are in a dark time. Harold Kushner, in his wonderfully helpful book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, says that the most important question to ask at times like these isn't, why me? The most important question to ask is, now what? Now what? So how do we bring our practice to these times of significant grief and loss? And the short answer to that question is, don't make it worse. And I'm going to suggest this morning that may be the best we can do right now. We often think that we have two choices, karmically speaking, to either make things worse or to make things better. But the limits of what an individual can do in a pandemic and racial tensions, among other global calamities, what one individual can do is probably kind of limited. So I'm going to take the middle way this morning and suggest that our effort in our practice needs to focus on how to not make things worse, and to examine the little micro ways every day that we make things worse, and the little micro ways every day that we can not make things worse. So very briefly, what I'd like to do is just talk about 3 ways that we make things worse, and then offer 4 suggestions for how we can not make things worse, and then open it up to the general discussion. So maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up to the general discussion. Bonnie, is that okay? I haven't done one of these before.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, thank you. So 3 ways that we make it worse with our grief and our fear. The first way, number 1, is that we cling to our story. We cling to our story of grief about how it was all better before the pandemic happened. We have this magical story about going back to normal. We have the story about getting back to where it was. We cling to a story that it was better before. So this is one way that we make it worse. We cling to our own point of view. Interestingly, in the Buddha's time, clinging to one's point of view, or to put it harshly, being intoxicated by one's point of view, was actually considered a more dangerous intoxicant than drugs and alcohol. Being intoxicated by one's point of view, by one's story, taking it on, taking more and more of it, feeding the grief, feeding the fear story, was actually considered a more dangerous intoxicant than drugs and alcohol. So this is very interesting. There's a precept that says a disciple of the Buddha does not indulge in intoxicants. And this is what we do when we cling to our story, our magical story about how it was better before the pandemic, or how, whatever it is that we cling to. This feeds the fear and feeds the grief, and actually makes it worse. The second way is sort of the opposite. The second way that we make it worse with the grief and fear is that we chase and accumulate distractions so that we don't have to feel. This chasing, this thirst for distractions. Tanha is the Sanskrit word, and there's this insatiable thirst to get a distraction. What are some distractions? Streaming video, 2-day shopping, the accumulation of food, for example, anything that we're doing to distract ourselves. The important point I want to make here is that it's all about intention. The things I just mentioned don't have to be a distraction from our grief and fear, but we have to watch our intention, the second of the Noble Eightfold Path, our intention to make sure that we're not doing stuff so that we don't have to feel. So that we're not doing things so that we don't have to feel that grief and fear. We actually do have to feel that grief and fear because there is in fact a light at the end of the tunnel for grief and fear, but first we have to feel it. The only way out is through on grief and fear, and feel what you're feeling is what we need to cultivate the practice of doing. And the best place to do that, of course, is on the cushion, because then we're not harming anybody else or ourselves with those feelings. So be careful about chasing and accumulating distractions, ways to get away from our grief and fear. And the third way that we make it worse is that we believe that we're separate. We believe that we are alone in our grief and fear. And so we think we're in this fortress by ourselves, and we build the fortress up by building our story, by escalating our stories of grief and fear, and then building our defenses, our distractions and defenses. Nagarjuna, a 8th century Buddhist philosopher in India, says that we put a lot of time into these fortresses, and it's true, they're very protective. Nothing can get in. No more grief and fear can get into these fortresses, and we can't get out. And that's the problem, is that we can't get out. So we cling. The ways we make it worse are we cling to our point of view. We get intoxicated actually by our grief and fear. We escalate the story. We chase and accumulate distractions so that we don't have to feel, and we believe that we're alone in all of this. So I would like to offer 4 practice opportunities for us to bring our practice to our grief and fear and be able to turn toward it. This doesn't mean we get drowned by it. It doesn't mean that we hug it necessarily. We're not here necessarily to make lifelong friends with it, but we are here to sort of sit down on the park bench with it and understand it, and understand the teaching of the grief and fear. So my first recommendation is be on high alert for anger. Anger, neuroscience tells us, is never the first emotion. It's always a mask for another one. And usually the mask, what it's masking is grief and fear. So we get angry so we don't have to have those 2 strong emotions. My teacher, Ed Brown, who some of you know, gave me a really wonderful exercise early on in my practice where he said, every time you want to say, I'm angry, instead say, I'm sad. And this has been a very powerful practice for me, because inevitably, as soon as I say I'm sad, the tears start. And of course, water softens everything. And if I can just admit that I'm sad, that puts some space around the feeling. And I don't end up masking it with anger and distracting myself with anger. Anger is a great distraction. We can get angry so we don't have to feel anything else. So be on high alert for anger, and see if the fear and the grief are what's under that. For the fear in particular, my recommendation is stop the escalation. And what we do with fear often is we get into a what if cycle. So not only is there fear about this, but what if the pandemic never ends? What if there's never a vaccine? What if the riots of racial injustice, extend to my city? Maybe they already have. We get into this what if cycle, and it's very hard to stop that what if escalation. So I have 2 suggestions for stopping the escalation, and that is get a mantra that will stop the escalation. Mine is, we're not going there. So every time my what if cycle starts, what I say to myself is, we're not going there. We're not going to do that what if cycle. And then immediately I start the short metaverse, which is, may I be happy, may I be safe, may I be free from fear, may I be free from suffering. And I repeat that until the what if settles down. And I can come back to just the present moment. My recommendation of a practice for grief is something that our society doesn't do hardly at all, and that is to take refuge in ceremony. Ceremonies for what has been lost are a powerful way to put some space around our grief and even to help us set it down. So I'm going to tell you about my current grief practice. I do it twice a day. When I turn on my computer every morning, the first thing I look at is the COVID fatality count. And I take that count over to my altar and I bow to my altar and I say, may you be free from fear and safe on your journey, especially if you died alone. May you be free from fear and safe on your journey, especially if you died alone. May you be free from fear and safe on your journey, especially if you died alone. So that's the first thing I do when I turn on my laptop in the morning, and it's the last thing I do before I turn off my laptop at night, is I do a ceremony for the people who have died of COVID-19 every day, twice a day. And it helps to get the grief out of my body and create some space. So one of the purposes of ceremony is to create some space and also to share our grief with the universe and let the universe hold it for us. Rumi has this wonderful line in one of his poems where he says, open your hands if you want to be held. So ceremony is a way to open our hands and then to be held in the larger context of the universe. This helps with the separation and the aloneness that we feel. So even if you're alone in your room, like I am right at the moment, you can do a ceremony, and the ceremony helps us realize that we are not alone, actually, and helps us release some of that grief. The final recommendation I have for both fear and grief is to find your voice, to tell your story, and ask for help. This is otherwise known as Sangha. This is why we have each other. Telling your story about fear and grief, again, allows it to get out of your body, to create some space for other emotions like gratitude and generosity to arise. Actually, telling your story is an act of generosity. In the Buddha's time, the first paramita, dana paramita, the paramita of generosity, we usually think about money and goods are the generosity, but actually in the Buddha's time, the most important thing that you could give and the highest form of generosity was to give courage. So when we tell our story about our grief and our fear, it gives other people courage to tell their story about grief and fear. And then we realize that we're not in this alone. Jack Kornfield says, compassion doesn't see the world's pain and sorrow as other. So when we tell our story, we encourage other people to tell their story and realize that we are not alone. One of the stories that I recommended for today was the story of Kisa Gotami, a woman in the Buddha's time who had lost a child. And Kisa Gotami distracted herself with a fable that her son could be brought back to life. And she went around looking for a way to bring him back to life. So she escalated the story to the point that she thought that her dead son could be brought back to life. And a friend recommended that she talk to the Buddha, and the Buddha said, I can help you with your son, but you need to bring me a mustard seed from a house that has not known death. So Kisa Gotami said, okay, I can do that. If that brings my son back, I can do that. So she started out. And every house was certainly willing to give her a mustard seed. But as she learned, as she went along, every house had known death. Every house. So she shared her story and heard other stories of death. And in the end, realized that death is just an important part of life. Uh, and she was able to set down her story and set down her distraction that she could bring her son back to life and realize that it's just the ever constant flow of existence. And she actually joined the Buddha's order and became one of the principal nuns of his order. So I would like to end with just two comments, and that is that grief and fear and even a pandemic do not excuse us from kind and compassionate action. They're not an excuse to not continue with our practice, to not continue with kind and compassionate action. And for those of us who have taken vows, the current situations in the world do not excuse us from our vows. We still practice those. We still invoke them to the best we can. Basically, one of the ways I look at our vow of compassion and kindness is that it's a scaffold that holds us up while we fall apart. So we can have all kinds of awful emotions, lots of grief and fear, but that does not excuse us from continuing to act with kindness and compassion. And lastly, to say it's important to take refuge in Sangha right now, especially to in Sangha find the encouragement and the accompaniment to navigate our grief and fear and to help others do the same. The only way out of this is together. So thank you. And I think what happens next, is comments, perspectives, and I'll be quiet now. So thank you all. It's a joy to be with you this morning.
Thank you, Valorie. If anyone has a question, you can just, oh, there we go, Dave.
Thank you, Valorie. I just had a quick question. You said you were going to give us 4 practice opportunities, and I only ended up catching 3. So maybe
okay.
Watch out for anger, stop the escalation of fear, and find your voice. What was the 4th one?
Do ceremonies.
Ah, okay. I mixed that in with something else. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. By the way, you can invent ceremonies. It's okay. Okay. There are lots of Buddhist ceremonies out there, but you can invent your own. Okay. You kind of have the drill by now of what a ceremony includes, right? So please don't stand on ceremony. Invent your own. Okay. It helps. Ceremonies really help for calming down fear and releasing grief. By the way, I gave you, it's kind of long, but one of the resources that I suggested was The Regarder of the Cries of the World from chapter 25 of the Lotus Sutra, which is an appeal to Avalokiteshvara, who's the being in Buddhism of infinite compassion. And the whole purpose of this verse that I sent you, the whole purpose is to realize that a request for help, a heartfelt request for help always gets a response, always gets a response. It may not be the response we wanted, it may not be the response we expected, but if we get quiet and make the appeal, a response always shows up. And that's the purpose of this verse from chapter 25 of the Lotus Sutra, is that in all of these dreadful circumstances that verse takes up, an appeal to the universe, or in this case, to our compassionate nature, Avalokiteshvara, will actually get a response. So I know it's kind of long, but I might suggest that you try out that verse as a chant. See what happens.
Lee?
Good morning, Lee.
You're on mute. Hang on. There we go. Try again. No, we still can't hear you. You're not on mute, but we can't hear you. Hmm.
Is there a way for her to type the question?
Yeah, you can type it in the chat if it's short. Otherwise, we can also come back to you and you can try to figure. Okay, do you want to type it in the chat? If the chat is at the bottom. No, no, okay. Okay.
Sometimes just logging off and logging back in takes care of it.
Oh, that's strange. Okay.
Just kind of signing off and in again.
Yeah, so if you want, you can sign off and back in, and you know, we can take up your question when you're back on, or else you can type it in the chat.
Maybe she could call somebody.
Okay, so let's go back. Renee, let me just probably go ahead.
Morning, and thank you. Very, very, very insightful, especially the part about anger. So I have two questions, actually. One is very keen on the advice of managing your own anger, but how do you manage when yourself, I guess, when someone else is angry around you?
Yeah.
And the second one is, I have found myself lately, whether it's related to this or not, restless in the cushion quite often. What do I do about that? How do I manage that?
Yeah, thank you, Renee. Those are really important, important question. How to manage others' anger, assuming that you kind of can't get away from it. So let's deal with that right at the moment. Okay, here's what I do. Okay, if somebody's kind of in my face, or I'm in a situation where I can't get away from somebody's anger, what I do is I stand there in what the Dalai Lama calls a stance of equanimity. Okay, so this is an upright. So first of all, make sure that your posture is upright. Okay, just not firmly, you know, not adamantly so, but you're taking this stance of equanimity. You're modeling the equanimity that they're not showing. Okay, so you're giving them a physical model of equanimity. And then here's what I'm saying to myself, not out loud. Okay, I'm just saying, may you be happy, may you be safe, may you be free from fear, may you be free from suffering, may you be happy, may you be safe. I'm just repeating the metaverse again and again and again. Okay, if there's a way to back away, you can do that. But what you need to do is, in your own mind, block your fear or angry response to that. And the universal antidote for this is some version of metta. Okay, so this is a hard one, but do it with your body first. Okay, bring a presence there, and then, you know, you're just wishing them well, even if not out loud. I've had this work because basically they don't want a response. It's usually grief underneath, or fear, and it needs to come out. So in a sense, what you're doing is you're being a safe, neutral place, but you're not taking it. You're putting out metta back to them. So that would be my suggestion for that, is the body, and then going on in your mind. And then if you can non-threateningly back away or bow out, as we say, do so. You don't have to sit there and take that. Okay, you don't. Okay, but you also don't get to retaliate. Not ever, not ever. The restlessness on the cushion, my suggestion is don't try to sit during those times. Do a meditative movement like Kinhin. Okay, see if you can, it counts. I just wanted to say this, it counts as meditation to do Kinhin. You don't have to be on your cushion. Okay. Right. You can check the meditation box for the day by doing Kinhin. You don't have to sit on the cushion. And you and I both have had this experience where we sit on the cushion and we are not on the cushion, right? We're off in, some other world somewhere. So just because we sit down doesn't mean we're meditating. So if you're too agitated to sit down, please continue your practice standing up or doing kinhin. It counts. It's okay. And then sit down if you can. You might find that 10 minutes of kinhin settles you enough that then you can get on the cushion. You might find that doesn't work, and you do kinhin for 40 minutes, and that's fine. Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
What I'm going to ask you to do is to not give up. Okay, don't go do something else like do the dishes or or read a book. It's like, this is your time for meditation. Just do it in a manner that your body can tolerate.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Renee.
Brenda?
Good morning, Brenda.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, nice to see you.
Thank you so much for doing this session. My question is around the first point, which you said, so it's sort of you say, feel your feelings, but don't indulge them, right? Don't get lost in the story.
Right. Don't get lost in the story. Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. So how do you know the difference between feeling a feeling and going that extra, creating a monster out of it?
Yeah. If you can't remember the last 2 or 3 minutes that you were here, that's one clue, and that is, where have I been for the last 2 or 3 minutes? That's a clue that you're off in escalation land. If you are suddenly find yourself doing something or in a part of the house and you're wondering how you got there, so that's a clue. Another clue is that you suddenly sort of wake up and realize that what you've just imagined is in fact a fantasy, and is in fact not the real moment. So my suggestion would be is that you kind of do a check-in and develop a habit to do a check-in is, am I present? This is a real good mantra to have for this is, am I present? And the more we do that, the more you will catch it when you're off in fantasy land with this. I might recommend, if you have it, Norman Fisher's book, Sailing Home, is wonderful. Chapter 5 is the chapter on false stories. And he has a real good description in there of the false stories that we create, and then we get lost. We get lost in them, and we wander around in the dusty realms of other lands, as Dogen says in Genjo Koan, right? We wander off in the dusty realms of other lands. So how do you know if you're wandering off in the dusty realms of other lands? Well, you learn to know the signs. So spend some time knowing who Brenda is when she's off in the realms of dusty lands, and sooner and sooner you will be able to bring yourself back. Am I here now? Right here, right now is a good mantra for this. Right here, right now.
Boomer? Yeah, we still can't hear you. Try again now. Do you want to call my phone and I can put you on speakerphone? That would be fast. You can call my cell phone. Let's move on. Okay, I can call you. All right, let's go with Nick first though.
Valorie, thank you so much for the discussion and good morning. I want to go back to one of your responses to Renee, and you talked about when the opportunity to bow out comes in these hostile situations. And I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind maybe giving a little bit more insight into that, on when do we need to bow out of certain scenarios, and how to do it. And if I can preface my question a little bit, for like the past 4 years, I was serving on this board, and when I first started, it was kind of like the honeymoon phase, and it's like, oh, everyone's wonderful colleagues, and we just love each other. And then as tough scenarios and tough situations kind of came up, the relationship started to get a little bit sour. And then 4 years later, it was one of the most hostile situations I had ever been in. And I finally just made the decision this past year to submit a resignation. And that opportunity to bow out was motivated mostly just because I was so tired of having to sift through all of that negativity and stuff like that. And looking back, I still don't really have an answer for myself, but looking back, I've kind of just asked myself, should I probably have gotten out of the situation a little bit sooner? So I'm just kind of wondering, what are maybe some indications where that threshold for we can only help so much,
Right.
that it's crossed. We actually can't help this situation anymore.
Yeah. So this is one of the intoxicants, actually, is that we believe that we can fix any situation. That we do. That we're a good person, we're a smart person, and we ought to be able to get along with everybody and fix every situation, and we can't. Okay, we can't. So I'm giving you all permission right now to acknowledge that you don't have the skills to get along with everybody. Okay, nobody does. We don't have the skills to get along with everybody. So how do we, or to fix everybody, right? We can't fix everybody so they can get along with us, right? And we can't fix ourselves. So, but, and the big caveat here is that how we exit a relationship is a critical time for either making it worse or not making it worse. So this is one of those really critical times where we have a choice to not make it worse. And often we do make it worse with our exit. We take our toys and go home. And all this means is that this type of person for you, Nick, is going to keep showing up in your life until you learn the skillful means to bow out. Okay. All that person is an example of a skill you don't have. That's all they are. That's all they are. They're just a teacher for a skill you don't have. So the first thing to do is to confess to yourself that you don't have the skills to deal with this person. You don't. You don't. Okay, this actually isn't about them. It's never about them. Okay, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, peace never depends on the other person. Peace never depends on the other person. Okay, so give yourself a break. You don't have the skills to deal with certain people out there. None of us do. It's okay. It's not a criticism. It's a fact of life, is we don't. But right now you have a critical time to either make it worse or not. How do you know? This was the first part of your question. How do you know that it's time to bow out? Your body knows, actually. Your body knows. When your body is resisting going to that meeting, when every time you think of that person, you start to sweat, okay? Your body knows. Even while your mind is going, I can fix this, I can get along, your body is going, get the hell out of there, right? Okay, so first foundation of mindfulness is the body, and that's there for a reason, and that is that our body has a huge amount of wisdom. And if your body is telling you that you can't do this relationship anymore, believe it. Okay, believe it. All right, that will create some space. That acknowledgement, that confession of, you know what, I actually don't know how to do this relationship anymore. I don't have the skills for this. That confession will actually create some space in which the graceful bow out option will arise. Trust me on this, it will, okay? The graceful bow out will arise. And the graceful bow out is you own it, okay? And that is, it's not, I have to leave this relationship because I can't get along with you. It's not that. I have actually said the script I'm about to give you to other people. Okay, I've actually said this, and here's my script. My script is, I realize that I don't have the skills right now to continue a skillful relationship with you. And I'm sorry, okay? I don't know how to do it, okay? And I think we're both stuck. So I'm going to suggest that we bow out for now and see if there's a point, where we might, in the future be able to come back together. Only say that if it's true, okay? But I have actually said this to people. I've said this, I'm really sorry. I don't have the skills to continue in a relationship. You can use the words bow out if they're going to understand this, or pick, some other words. I lived at San Francisco Zen Center. I lived monastically for 10 years, 11 years, as some of you know, and I had to do this a couple times. And that I bowed out to people, and we agreed just to meet in ceremonial space. So we just bowed to each other and didn't talk, and it worked. So find your own script, but find it now while you're not trying to get out of a relationship. So in other words, develop the bow out script when you're not trying to bow out. Okay. So what is it that you're going to say? And my experience is that it works to say, I don't have the skills, because that deflates any of their counter argument. Okay. They can't argue with you not having the skills. So, and then you just say, I'd like to just take a break from our communications for a while. So, but your intention here, your highest intention in a bow out, is to not make it worse.
Thank you so much, Valorie.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning.
Valorie, can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yay. There we are.
Okay. So, question for you is, I have one question. I think Lee has another question. I'm going to put this very simply. I've gone through a lot of bad experiences. I've gone through physical, mental, psychological, emotional, and sexual violence. And what I have learned from Les, by sitting with him, actually sitting at his feet, is that whatever comes, you just give your attention to what needs to be done, take care of things. And what you're saying is also true. And this is something that I feel is what gets us out of our heads gets us out of our story. When we start taking care of things, we start giving attention to things. It's not about, yes, we are carrying everything around with us. Can be positive experience, can be negative experiences. But what really helps us, I think, to bring us into the present moment is taking care of things and giving attention, but not asking for attention. What I see in the world that is going on, there's too much, even with all of what we're going through, it just, even with this Zoom and Instagram and different social media platforms, it's like people want more and more attention. And it seems like that it's never enough. And I find the antidote to be the reverse of that. Is like, give your attention to taking care, give your attention to things that are important. And so what all these things that you said were really like very helpful, and thank you for this. But I wanted to get your take on this.
Your ability to give other people attention is directly proportional to your ability to give attention to yourself. If you neglect yourself for others, that's fertile ground for resentment. Resentment is a very insidious form of anger. And I would highly recommend that you get acquainted with your resentment line.
Okay.
And know where that is. And make a vow that you are not going to overstep it. We give too much to others, and then resentment comes up. And even though we don't think they'll ever notice, they will. Resentment leaks like crazy out of us. So please become very intimate with your resentment line and know where it is and know when it's approaching or when you are approaching it, and go back to taking care of yourself. The metaverse that I keep bringing up this morning, as you may know, the metaverse insists that we start with us. May I be happy, may I be safe, may I be free from fear, may I be free from suffering. And only after you do it for yourself are you allowed to take it out to other people. So especially in these times, people do need a lot of attention because they're feeling the separateness acutely. We're not able to gather in ways that we have been. And people are starved for connection, but there's this belief in separateness that kind of gets in the way. And unfortunately, the pandemic is reinforcing that. So take care of yourself. However, back to connect your question with Nick's question, okay? You are not obligated to put yourself in the path of abusive people, nor to continue in relationship with them. You are not obligated to stand there and take it from abusive people. This is the reason for the bow out. And the bow out is for you. Okay, the bow out is a return to a focus and an attention on you and taking care of yourself. So please, please everybody, take care of yourself in this. You can't save the world this time. You can't. And the people who can are working on it. Okay, they're working on a vaccine. They're working on other palliatives. The people who can save the world are working on it. And the obligation of the rest of us is to not make it worse for them. So we make sure that we are giving ourselves enough attention, quietly, not in a distracted manner. And that will remind us that the universe is unlimited, and therefore the patience and compassion that is always available to us is also unlimited.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
Hi, Teresa. Good morning.
Hi, Valorie. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
Thank you for being with us today. I appreciate all the things you have been saying this morning. I have a question for you. You said till you don't learn how to bow out, that person will keep showing up in your life. Why is that once you learn how to bow out, that person will no longer show up?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply that that person would never show up again. Okay, that person will show up just because that energy is available. And don't think of them as a form body. Okay, think of them as an energy, and that's an energy that's going to show up in your life. What's changed is your ability to deal with it, right? So the bow out does not make that energy go away. What it does is it gives you the space to figure out how to deal with it in a manner that doesn't make it worse. Yeah. And one of the benefits of a bow out and the space that you give yourself with a bow out is it gives you an opportunity to see that energy differently. And to maybe see its benefits and its uses. I had to bow out one time to a person who was even more detail-oriented than I am, if that's possible. I like, I love checklists and, you know, all kinds of stuff. I just, but theirs was kind of over the top. And I kind of had to take a space from her for a bit, and I did. And you know what? When I took the space from her, I missed her. I missed all the things that her detailedness would catch that mine didn't. And this happened to actually be in the sewing realm, the sewing Buddha's robe realm. And I am grateful to her every day for her nitpickiness and her detail, because now I catch stuff that I wouldn't have caught before. But it actually took some distance to, instead of my flash of irritation coming up every time I saw her, now what comes up is deep gratitude. So that energy didn't change. My energetic response to that changed. That's the purpose of the bow out, is to give you some space.
Peter?
Yes, thank you, Valorie. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Peter. Nice to see you.
That's nice to see you too. One of the things that you said about you know, watch out for seeking distractions really resonated with me, and I've been actually over a very, very timely talk over the last week. I've been noticing more and more just kind of how much of an urge I have, especially these days, to distract myself and find more distractions. And it's been very interesting to sit with that and kind of try to understand what's behind it. What you were saying today was very, very helpful in understanding that. One thing that I've also been struggling with is some of the people near me, some of the people I love and care for. I see also distracting themselves more and more. You know, I think it's kind of common throughout life, but even especially now, even more acutely. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on you know, how to love them, how to support them, how to because it kind of pains me to see them distracting themselves instead of kind of engaging with the fear and uncertainty and finding some more peace within that. And I want that for them.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you have any thoughts or suggestions.
Yeah, Peter, thank you for your heartfelt expression of your question. That's it's a hard one to watch those that we love build that fortress, isn't it? Because of course, what we're afraid of is that fortress is going to get built, and we're going to be on the outside of their fortress eventually. So peace never depends on the other person, right? So your task is to not get discouraged by their distractions and to continue to be there for them in a loving, supportive way, but not in a way that demolishes their fortress necessarily. In other words, not deliberately trying to do that. You need to trust and have faith that your steady presence buttressed by your practice, which is where you get the steady presence, right? Okay, that steady presence means more to them than you will know. And when their fortress of distractions finally breaks, they're going to need you there with that calm, steady presence. So this is a real important point, Peter, where you need to know where your resentment line is, okay? That you need to not say, darn it, I'm trying to, get you away from your distractions. You're not appreciating it. It's like, don't go there. So be careful about your resentment line with them. The Dalai Lama has a wonderful phrase about what we need to be in these times. It's the stance of equanimity. Okay, this doesn't mean rigidly holding on to our equanimity, right? Like that could work, but think of it more as the equanimity of a well-built ship. Okay, that a well-built ship is built to toss on the waves and to come back to uprightness. Okay, the more these suffering family members or suffering loved ones see a model of a stance of equanimity, the more that they will understand that that's possible. So your job right now is to be what they can't be, so that they will have in front of them an alternative of a way to be, and it will work. It'll take longer than you want it to, but it will work. I'll tell you a really quick story. Blanche Hartman, former abbess, late abbess of San Francisco Zen Center, she and her husband used to go to the peace marches in the 60s down in downtown San Francisco. But what they would do is they would take their cushions down to Civic Center Square with all of the riots and the tear gas and everything going down. They would take their cushions down there and sit, just to give an alternative with their body of a way to be. This is your offering right now, Peter, is you're offering an alternative that doesn't make things worse. Please, just keep doing that.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Carolina? Yes, Carolina.
It's nice to meet you, Valerie.
Good morning.
Thank you for your guidance today. I have a question. Backing up to what you were talking about, and bowing out, and the script that you've already written for yourself about not having the skills to be able to be in a healthy relationship with this person. And then you said something at your end that you bow out, and then as you bow out, you hope something. And I don't quite hear that.
Yeah. So as we bow out, what we're our intention, it's not a hope, because those can get dashed, right? But our intention is that this isn't going to be forever, that we will develop the skills. This is why the bow out, we never think the bow out is forever. Okay, it's a temporary hiatus so that we can develop some skills. So the hope is, the intention is that I have the intention of actually learning how to be more skillful in these situations. And this is where Sangha can help, because you can go to other people, somebody else that you trust, and say, I'm really having a problem in this kind of situation. What do you do when you get to this? So the hope is that we will develop skills to be able to meet these kinds of energies more skillfully. So the bow out is not a slamming the door.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. Lee has I don't know, Lee's been trying to ask a question since before she could talk. So.
Yes. Wait. So I think what we need to do, Lee, is use Umar's audio. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we are using his
Okay.
audio.
There we go. We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So I just was, you were talking about having rituals and the value of them for working with grief. And I really appreciate that. And one of the rituals that I find that I've been going to, of course, like everybody else in this time, you know, I too find the urge to go to distractions, like, you know, go onto Amazon and see if I can shop for a pair of jeans or something like that. But, you know, I understand that that's a distraction, and sometimes, you know, you just have to indulge that, but you don't want to try to take refuge in that. One of the things that I do is I go out every morning and I put out water in little dishes for the birds that come to the backyard. And I find that it just, eaten grief and fear and all of the emotions that we're all feeling, it just kind of has that, it's almost magical effect. And I try, you know, sometimes when I feel particularly upset or something, I tend to want to run to it. You know, I tend to want to run outside, and I try, you know, I have to kind of keep a balance of not being too dependent on, you know, a ritual. For helping. And also little things like when, as some of you may know, my elder brother passed away recently. And one of the things that we do in the tradition that he was very much a part of is we got together as a family over Zoom and said prayers for him every night. And we all lit a 24-hour candle every day, so that there was always a candle going in the house for 7 days. And I just want to share the end of that ritual with you, which I was particularly moved by and I had never experienced before, was that you have the idea that the spirit of the person has been with you during this time, and now you have to leave the house and escort it to the road, you know, as you would a guest who's been in your house. So we, over Zoom, carrying our cell phones, just all walked out in our many, you know, very disparate places, and walked down a few blocks and heard the birds singing in the morning, and talked with each other, and, you know, spoke about it. And it was a very moving ritual and very, very helpful. So I am, as you are, a believer in taking those healing rituals seriously. They are helpful.
Thank you. I want to mention what you did, because it's really, really.
Well, we just lost it.
Sorry, no. Oh, whoops. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, Valerie, you're going to have to repeat that. I tried to spotlight you. I accidentally muted you for a second.
Okay. Are we okay now?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. I want to mention and highlight something that Lee said that is really important in these ceremonies of grief. Okay. It's really helpful when you're doing a ceremony of grief to have something to actually physically set down. Okay. Or escort out the gate, you know, as you did there. To be able to put your grief into a stone or a leaf, or maybe a piece of paper with some words on it, and take it out to, you know, a place in nature or something like that, to set it down, to thank whatever it is that you're letting go of, and then to physically set it down and bow out to it, is actually an extremely helpful grief abatement practice, is to actually physically set something down. So thank you for mentioning that. Thank you for walking Richard to the gate. Yeah, that's an extremely important, because we carry this around. We carry, you know, Kisa Gotami carried her dead baby. So it's really important in the ceremonies that we do, especially around grief, many of them are around that, is that we actually set something down. It helps. it helps to do that. The other thing that I wanted to mention that Lee made me think of here is that the universal antidotes in Buddhism to anything, to any of the 108 kleshas, the emotional responses that make things worse, the universal antidote to greed, hate, and delusion is gratitude and generosity. Gratitude and generosity are the universal antidotes to suffering and to the actions that we take to make it worse. So even in these times, there are micro ways that we can express gratitude for the water, for the birds, for anything, for this gathering this morning, to express gratitude. And the generosity, back to the point I made to Umar, the generosity starts with us. Being generous to ourselves, to our emotions that are coming up. But just know that these two practices of gratitude and generosity are universal antidotes. So Lee, thank you so much for your
Thank you
your
so
story.
much for your talk.
Thank you.
Dave, you had another question?
Yeah, Valorie, you've talked a couple of times about the need for skillful means in following up some of these suggestions for practice opportunities. I'd like to drill down just a little bit more on the whole idea of modeling equanimity for people close to you, family members or whoever, who may be feeling a lot of fear and anxiety. I think that particular thing, it's a good idea, but it also demands some skillful means. The particular thing that I'm thinking of is what I grew up with my parents. My mother had serious anxiety disorders, and my father's response to that, which he clearly meant, he was a very good-hearted man, and he clearly meant to be helpful to her, but he basically came across as showing what he clearly thought was equanimity, and it basically just made her feel like she was suffering all alone.
Yeah.
So I think that's certainly a serious pitfall when somebody's anxiety is met with equanimity from their partner or family member. And I just wonder if you have any sort of helpful suggestions of what to watch for when we try to do that.
Yeah. No, thank you. So let's be honest here. Equanimity can, in fact, sometimes make things worse, right? It can, unfortunately, because it can look aloof. It can look separate. It can look like, I've got it all together and you don't. It can, the words that sometimes go with this are very devastating. Words like you're overreacting. You're being too sensitive. So this is not actually a stance of equanimity, and we need to get really clear about this. This is a stance of, I can't deal with your emotions. That is not equanimity. Let me be really clear about that. Okay. The stance of, which is what, you're overreacting, you're too sensitive, all of these dismissive judgments, okay, are not coming from a place of equanimity. They're coming from a place of, I'm afraid of your emotions and I can't deal with them. That's where they're coming from. So what's the equanimity in this situation? Well, I'll give you one example, and maybe this will inspire others, that other people can come up with. One is that to share your own story. Okay, is to show that, you have your anxious moments too, but to deliver that in an equanimous manner. In other words, to deliver your story, to say, look, sometimes, at 3 a.m, I wonder what's going to happen if my daughter gets this disease and she dies first, right? So one way to equanimously meet, this is a bit counterintuitive, but to equanimously meet the anxiety is with an equanimous explanation of your own anxiety. This helps people see that they're not alone, okay? The second thing I would recommend is let them vent on their anxiety for a bit, because if you don't, they're not going to be able to hear any equanimous suggestion that your mouth or your body makes. Is let them go on. The important part here, the skillful principle here is to be with them rather than trying to fix them. We're often trying to fix people, but it's not actually for their benefit. It's so we don't have to deal with their upset, and we need to acknowledge that. So can you be with her without trying to fix it? You know, so you might imagine that. How could your dad have been with your mom rather than trying to fix her? How can you and Suzanne be with each other without trying to fix each other? And that might actually be a worthwhile conversation to have. I want to say something, if I might, about distractions, okay? Because some of you have brought up, you know, various sorts of distractions. Distraction, I want to clarify here, distractions are in the intent, not in the substance, okay? So to Lee's point, shopping for jeans on Amazon, you may actually really need a new pair of jeans, okay? That's not a distraction. That's not a distraction, okay? The distraction is in the intent, never in the content, okay? Just like intoxicants are in the intent, never in the content. A glass of wine is not necessarily an intoxicant. Buying something on Amazon is not necessarily a distraction and an intoxicant. It's all about the intention that we bring to this. Intention is everything, okay? And understanding our intention of why we're binge watching, you know, This Is Our Life, you know, or, you know, Picard, or, you know, something, you know, I don't know, Good Doctor, whatever it is, you know, that we're binge watching. To understand that, you know, if our intention is to give ourselves a break from the news, that's fine. That's fine to do that. But I think it was back to, maybe it was Brenda's point, is how do we know? How do we know? How do we discern this distraction from, you know, intention? Is to realize when we've lost the intent here, that we don't know why we're doing this. We don't know why we're suddenly on episode 27 and we can't remember. We thought the last one was episode 15, right? You know, so it's not the thing you're doing that's the problem. It's the intention behind the thing you're doing that makes it a distraction or an intoxicant. Okay, I want to be really clear about that. This does not, you know, don't make it worse. Don't make it worse by thinking that you can't have anything from Amazon or you can't watch a TV show. That just makes it worse. It does. It does. But intentionality is everything, because if we don't keep a firm hold on our intention, inadvertent suffering creeps in.
Brenda, you have another comment?
I have a follow-up on the first one. Okay, but then, you know, you might start the watching of whatever show with the intent of, I'm just going to take a break from the news, and then you might get to episode 10.
Right. Yeah.
So it seems like things can change.
Yeah, so it's a practice, and it's a relentless practice to, so at that point you would say, okay, I realize now that I'm in distraction mode, and I'm not gonna indulge this distraction. I'm not gonna watch episode 11, you know. And maybe next time you'll catch it sooner. The idea is sooner and sooner to be able to develop this practice to catch our turn into mindlessness sooner and sooner. And it works after a while, is to just come back. What's my intention here? What's my intention here? And you'll notice this takes some time to notice when you've gone off into mindlessnessville, okay, into distractionville. It does. It takes some time to notice that.
I just want to make a comment, Valorie, that this is such a helpful talk. I mean, this is like spiritual hygiene 101. I mean, how to dismantle anger, how to deal with grief and loss, how to recognize these different states. And what I'm getting out of this, kind of overlapped with my own life, is that all these different energies exist in the world. You could call them positive or negative, but more like harmful and helpful or neutral. And like we can get caught by certain patterns of like, I want to fix this, or this makes me mad, and then we're hooked. And then if we unhook that, that creates an opening for bowing out and exploring something different, a different way of being, and inviting more helpful energies into our life. So while we can't fix the world or save the whole world, we can manage our own consciousness.
That's right. That's right.
Our own experience throughout the world, and maintain a sense of peace and love as much as possible. Or when we get off, get back to it faster. And then that does also subtly, it's actually the only way we can help the world, is if we help ourselves first.
That's right.
I mean, I could just relate to everyone's questions, and this was just a very helpful talk. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I do want to say that thank you, Bonnie. That one of the most helpful things that we can do for ourselves and others during this time is to acknowledge when we're not peaceful, when we're not equanimous, and to just confess. Just confess. You know, I notice anger arises. I wonder what the sadness and fear is under that. I notice I can't do the stance of equanimity right now. What's so interesting about acknowledgement of what we're really feeling when we can't do something is that instantly that acknowledgement opens up space. Because what we've been doing is we've been protecting the fortress by not acknowledging it. And it's like, you know what, I feel really overwhelmed. And just to say that, just to say, I'm feeling despondent, I'm feeling overwhelmed, just to say that opens up a crack of space that some alternatives and some help can arrive. I see that we have about 5 minutes left. So I would like to dedicate the meeting of all of us today to the safety and the well-being of everyone on this call, and to all beings. May everyone be free from fear, be safe. It may be too much right now to wish that everyone could be happy, but to be safe and free from fear and free from suffering is pretty good. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, for moderating.
Thank you so much. One quick reminder is that this session has been recorded, but we want to respect everyone's privacy. So if you want your question removed or a part of your question removed, I can easily edit that out before posting it. So just shoot me a text message or an email. But all of your questions were so good, and the answers. So we'll want to share as much of the content as we can.
Thank you. And if I used any Buddhist lingo and terminology today that is unfamiliar to anyone, I would be happy to clarify that. Perhaps you could let Bonnie know, and I would. I tried not to get into the jargon today, but if I did and it was confusing for you, I'd be happy to clarify that.
Wonderful talk. Thank you, Valorie.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Be well. I hope to see you again.